Iaidō is a traditional Japanese martial art of drawing and cutting with a katana. It originated from the battlefield with Fudo samurai warriors learning actual techniques in life and death conflicts. Today, however, the purpose of training in Iaidō is to develop a mental discipline through the training and perfection of sword forms. Next, we will demonstrate Happogiri, an exercise with the katana practicing the basic 8 directional cuts. We will next perform some techniques as a group. Our first technique is Juto Sona Ichi, which is a basic technique performed in a standing position. The swordsman notices an attacker in front of him. He draws his sword to cut across the opponent's shoulders. While the opponent is stumbling back, the swordsman steps in and finishes him off with another cut. While remaining alert, the swordsman shakes off the blood from his sword and sheathes it.
Nice to know.
The next technique is Iaidō. The swordsman draws and cuts his opponent before he has a chance to draw. While the opponent is stumbling back, the swordsman steps up to cut the opponent's head, then finishes them off with a downward cut.
They are a brutal group, considering how calm and gentle they are now.
The next technique is Shato. An opponent is attempting to cut down the swordsman. The swordsman intercepts with a diagonal cut to the opponent's forearm. As the opponent stumbles back, the swordsman delivers another diagonal cut, then steps aside and finishes him off with a cut from behind. The next technique is Shihoto Sona Ni. The swordsman notices an attacker to his right and begins to draw. Meanwhile, another opponent attempts to grab and restrain the swordsman from behind. The swordsman immediately stabs the opponent behind him, cuts down the first opponent, then cuts down 2 additional attackers approaching from other directions. The last technique is Zendosto. The swordsman draws and cuts it into his opponent, drives his sword deeper into his opponent's chest, then finishes him off with a final cut. The next techniques are performed from a sitting position. The first technique is Mai. The swordsman is sitting face to face to the opponent in a meeting. As the meeting deteriorates, the swordsman senses an imminent attack from his opponent, draws and cuts first. The swordsman then finishes off his opponent with a downward cut.
Oh, yes, you can.
The next technique is Higari.
Oh, okay. Staggerums.
The swordsman, sensing an attack from his right, draws to cut his opponent, then finishes him off. The next technique is Yushiru. The swordsman, sensing an attack from directly behind him, draws to cut his opponent, then finish him off. The last technique is Yaigeki. The swordsman, facing an opponent, notices an attack, draws and cuts him first. The swordsman then moves in and finishes the opponent with another cut. While remaining alert, the swordsman shakes off the blood from the sword and sheaths it. The opponent, not quite dead, attempts one last cut to the swordsman's leg. The swordsman stands up to block the cut, then moves in to finish him off. Next, we will demonstrate some more advanced techniques.